Yes, I read 50 books in 30 days. No lie, no short books, no audiobooks, 50 real books. 16,553 pages in 30 days. The first thing I had to do before the 30 days started was go to the library to actually get the books I was gonna read, and I spent a lot of time wandering around, but I came out with a bunch. It's the first day of the 30 days, but it's also the first day of 2024. That's actually one of the reasons I decided to do this challenge. I wanted to show what's possible when you really stick to and commit to a resolution. It was 9:30 a.m. when we started off the challenge with a book I've been wanting to read for a while, The Beautiful and Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, my review. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 since I like the way that he wrote the characters in their different points in life, but I dislike some of the stylistic choices, like the separation into many parts and the play-like dialogue used at times. I'm going to be doing these short reviews for every book that I read. But day 1 is not over yet because for this challenge to be completed, I'll need to read more than just one book a day. So I'm going to reread one of my favorite series that I haven't reread in years, Throne of Glass. And we're doing it in release order, so starting off with TOG. One reason I'm focusing on a series at first is because it's much easier to be motivated to read when the story isn't finished. So if you want to read more, that's a little tip for you. It's also time-lapse time. For some of the books, I'll be doing time-lapses of me reading them. I'm also on winter break right now, which makes it easier to have more time to read, but in a few days I'll start school again, so that'll amp up the challenge a lot. Review time, 4 out of 5. I'm biased since this was one of my favorites growing up, but revisiting it, I can see that some of the relationships that develop seem rushed. Overall, I still absolutely love this book, but I'm gonna be pretty stingy with what I give a 5 out of 5. And we are still not done yet, people, because I started Crown of Midnight, the second book, right before bed, and I got about 175 pages in, and I'm gonna finish them in the morning. It is now day 2 and I finished Crown of Midnight, so it's review time. I also just realized that I should probably make these reviews pretty short because I don't want this video to be an hour long, and as well, these reviews are gonna be pretty much my personal opinion, not really focused on like technicalities, so this is my first 5 out of 5. So I started the prequel Assassin's Blade before a workout class, and then I finished it after lunch. Review time, 3.5 out of 5. Some sections were definitely better than others. I started Heir of Fire before bed and got 200 pages in. I finished the book off in the morning, so review time, 3.5 out of 5 because Chaos parts really carried and the ending was pretty well written, but I didn't love this book as much as the others. And in the afternoon, I finished the 4th book in the series, Queen of Shadows, so review time, 5 out of 5, just got better and better as it went on, and the attention to detail was really astounding. I ended the night by starting on the 5th book, and then I finished it in the morning. So review time, 4.5 out of 5, because some parts in the beginning felt like filler, but they were necessary, and I really loved the callbacks to so many details from the books before, and I also completely forgot how devastatingly well written the ending was. I read Tower of Dawn in the afternoon and evenings. The first unexpected difficulty that I've encountered during this challenge is that reading so much in a day really kind of hurts my neck. So review time for Tower of Dawn, 3.5 out of 5. It's definitely a great story, like really well written, but the difference from the others in the series loses at some points here. Today spent practically the whole day reading Kingdom of Ash, which is the final book in the series, and I got through all 980 pages of it. So review time, 6 out of 5, 10 out of 5, 1 million out of 5. This is the book. I could go on for ages describing how much I love it. This is the book. I got off to a later start to my reading today, but I began by reading Peril at End House. So review time, 4 out of 5. I have read other Poirot books, and I picked this one up at random, so I wasn't expecting it to be as good as the more famous ones, but I was so surprised by the ending, so having lower expectations definitely made it better for me. So I read Turtles All the Way Down in the afternoon, which is a John Green book that I haven't read yet, and so review time, 2 out of 5. It was just way too cringe at times, and the friend was pretty terrible, but at least I learned about Tuataras, so, we got that. Right before bed, I ended up reading Canary Row, and since it's pretty short, I finished it, so review time, 3 out of 5 because it is a very unique book with an interesting setting and definitely interesting characters, but it just might not appeal to everyone, and there's definitely better Steinbeck novels. So today I read Crazy Rich Asians since I've seen the movie but I hadn't read the book yet. So review time, 3 out of 5 because it's a really solid book. Not perfect, but good, and I liked that it had a much larger focus on Astrid. So I finished off the night by reading The Sun Also Rises, so review time, 2.5 out of 5, just because it wasn't really my kind of book, but I get why it's a classic, and it's one that I'll probably like a little bit better when I reread it at just a different time in life. This is the first day where I'm going to school. For the rest of the challenge, I'll be balancing all the reading with schoolwork for 5 new classes. That's why today I'm reading a lighter novel, Northanger Abbey. So review time, 2 out of 5. It was just boring to me and I didn't like the narrator jumping in, but the last part of the book was much better than the first half. I also read Cat Among the Pigeons before bed, so review time, 2 out of 5 because it was pretty basic and there was just a lot going on, and I didn't like that Poirot just came in at the end. Also, in case you were wondering, this marks the 16th book so far. I read Madame Bovary today, but I was super busy because I had class and I had to do some errands, so I read a bit on the train and then finished the book later at home. So review time, 3 out of 5. It's a solid book with like pretty good writing, but it just wasn't really my taste. I had to read it for class, so for like a book that I was obligated to read, it was pretty good. So today I was pretty busy with class, but I ended up reading the first non-fiction book in the challenge, Your Brain on Food. So review time, 4 out of 5. I loved how the author incorporated everything from Hamlet references to anecdotes of his students to convey the scientific facts. I just wish that he spent more time on foods rather than drugs. I also read Wuthering Heights before bed, so review time, 2 out of 5, maybe less. Honestly, I just hated the framing of the story, like the narration perspective bothered me so much, it was really hard for me to get past that. So today I read The Winter of Our Discontent, which was pretty on brand for the weather that we're having right now. So review time, 5 out of 5. I actually like this book so much better than I expected to, and it's my new second favorite Steinbeck novel. It was just great. Like it was just great. I really recommend it. Today I actually woke up sick, probably because it's like negative 40 degrees outside these days. So that meant more time for reading since I didn't go to school, but also less time for reading because I had to sleep more. Nonetheless, I ended up reading Midnight Sun, and I've read the original, so it was interesting to see it from a different perspective. Review time, 3 out of 5, because it wasn't bad, it wasn't amazing, but I did like how we got to see more of Edward's powers in it. Unfortunately, I'm still sick today. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but it's a real roadblock in the challenge since I only read one book today rather than more like I had planned. But anyways, I read The Sound and the Fury. Review time, honestly, this is a 1 out of 5 because the writing style just was not for me. But to be fair, I am reading it with a headache already, so that might have made it worse for me. Still sick today, but I'm better than before at least. But I could still only read one book today since I couldn't go to the library to get new ones. But I read Call Down the Hawk. Review time, 2 out of 5. It just felt like a very needless extension to the series and really couldn't hold a candle to the original series, and I didn't feel motivated to read any of the following books. I'm still a little sick, but I was well enough that I went to school and to the library today. I had to return the books that I've read and of course get some new ones, so I read one of the new books I got called The Kalima Tales. Review time, 4 out of 5. The author did an amazing job of describing the setting, I enjoyed his writing style in general, and I'm really glad that I read it. Then I finished off the day with The Martian Chronicles, which made me love Bradbury even more. Review time, 5 out of 5. It was a solid 4.5 while I was reading, but once I got to the Tom part, that really pushed it to perfect for me. Also, a little check-in for you guys. We are halfway through the challenge and the current book count is 25, which means I'm exactly on track. Today I read On the Road, which I've been wanting to read for a while. Review time, 3.5 out of 5. I think my expectations were just too high, and I didn't love the characters, but it does a great job of displaying the atmosphere of those people at that time, and it definitely made me want to travel more. Another day of school and another day of reading. The only way that this is possible for me to do is because I basically spend every spare minute reading, like in between classes and stuff. And this morning I managed to read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. By accident, the book that I got had pictures in it, which actually turned out to be pretty cool. I also got a couple books from the library while I was at school. Anyways, review time, 3 out of 5, because it was definitely a unique idea, but I didn't like how in the end we learned what happened from his letter. Like, that kind of framing I didn't love. I also read The Ocean at the End of the Lane in the afternoon and evening. Review time, 4.5 out of 5. I really loved this book and its world, and it's definitely worth a read. I think the epilogue was done especially well too.
Also, I was near the end of the book when I realized that I didn't know the protagonist's name, which sometimes is really bothersome, but this is probably the best written, like, unnamed protagonist book that I've read. Today's book is the most random book of the challenge, and by that I mean the one you've probably never heard of and the one that I don't even remember how I heard of. But Mink River was the book I read today. Review time 4 out of 5 because it's such a unique book and it did what it was trying to do really well. I love how it used language, like that was a really core part of the novel, but it might not be everyone's cup of tea, and I didn't like the lack of quotation marks. But it's definitely worth a read if you're in the mood for a more obscure novel. Now you might be wondering how I'm able to read this many books. Well, the two main things that make this possible is number one, I can read relatively fast. I'm not the fastest reader in the world, but generally I can read pretty fast. But the second thing is prioritization. Taking the time to really commit to reading is what's driving this challenge. You guys have seen that I've spent practically every spare minute reading, and I'm not saying that you should always do everything with a book in hand, but when you go out of your way to prioritize something, it really makes a difference. Anyways, the book I read today was The Road. Review time 3.5 out of 5. I liked it, but such a coincidence that I read 2 books in a row that don't like quotation marks, like what? But I did find the way that it handled the dystopia pretty unique, since I feel like family isn't always that big of a focus in them, and it definitely made me grateful for the simple things in life too.
So the plan for this weekend is the Chronicles of Narnia. Yes, the entire series. I read this maybe like a decade ago, and I'm not even sure if I read the whole thing, so I only remember small things about the first couple books. In order to complete the challenge, this whole weekend I'm going to try and read the entire series, and we've got a time-lapse time again for this. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the most famous and the first of the series, was of course what I started with. Review time 4 out of 5. It's a classic, and reading it as an adult, I like how the author made sure to put an emphasis on the fact that the witch's food was really kind of like a drug to Edmund, which explained his behavior a lot more. Then I read Prince Caspian, the second book. Review time 3 out of 5. It's a good book. It was interesting to see a more political conflict in a magical world, but some parts when they were traveling were a bit dull. After lunch, I read The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I completely forgot how good this book was. Review time 4 out of 5. It was just really amazing, and it was a book that made it feel like anything was possible. I love the descriptions of all of the various settings a lot. Now my hands smell like books and my neck hurts, but I read The Silver Chair, making that 4 books read today. Review time 2 out of 5. It was okay, but in comparison to the others, not as great and too predictable. But I did like that there was kind of a tragic aspect to it. I started off our second Narnia day with The Horse and His Boy. Review time 3.5 out of 5. I think it was really smart that certain characters were in there, no spoilers though, and we got to see more of the other lands, and I like the attention to detail in some parts, but it just wasn't as amazing compared to others in the series. Then I read The Magician's Nephew, which is the prequel to the series. Review time 3.5 out of 5. It really helped to enhance the whole world there, but since all the multiverse stuff is so overdone these days, it just made it not my favorite. Finally, I finished with The Last Battle. Review time 3.5 out of 5. I like the way he wrote the kind of symbolism and allegory in it, but I didn't love the middle parts, but the ending in the last few chapters with certain characters really carried it for me. So after reading the whole series this weekend, my total book count is up to 37. After reading childhood stories for the whole weekend, I read a book called Childhood's End today. Review time 3 out of 5. I think he did an amazing job at building the suspense and the curiosity, like you really want to know what happens next. But I didn't love the ending, like the last part. I was expecting something different. It's definitely a solid book, but I think Space Odyssey is definitely better. Then before bed I started reading Growth of the Soil and finished the first part. I finished Growth of the Soil in the morning, so review time 3 out of 5. It's a good story. I like the first part much better than the second though, and I didn't like to focus on some secondary characters, but I'm glad I read it since I like the main concept of it. Then I read Dracula in the Night. Review time 3 out of 5. It's a classic, like the story's interesting, but I didn't like the style with the letters and journals, and at some parts it dragged. Also, I don't love like horror in general, so that's why I didn't really like it. Today I was super busy with schoolwork, but I read The Pastures of Heaven. Review time 4.5 out of 5. This was as good as I had expected Canary Row to be. I think the concept of the neighborhood kind of stories was done better here. In the beginning with the little frog, I realized it was going to be good, but by the time I got to Pat's part, I was like, damn, this is amazing. I really love this book, but it wasn't absolutely perfect. Today I read Cup of Gold, review time, 2.5 out of 5. The writing was pretty good, like there were definitely some lines, some quotes that I loved, but I didn't like the overall story as a whole, and it just wasn't that interesting to me. Then I stayed up later than usual to finish The Gods Themselves, review time. This is actually so hard to review because the second part was perfect, the first part I didn't like at all, and the last was fine, so a 3.5 out of 5 I guess, but the second part really makes the book worth reading. Today I read Between the Acts, and a random thing I noticed, so many of the books I've read in the past few weeks have been mentioning rhododendrons for some reason. Anyways, review time, 1 out of 5. It was just extremely boring, and I didn't like the writing style at all. Just not for me. But I also read The October Country in the evening. Review time, 3.5 out of 5. Some of the stories I like better than others, like Jack in the Box, The Lake, and Scythe, but others weren't my favorites. Overall, though, it was an extremely creative book, like so much creativity in every story, and of course it was well written. Today I read To Kill a Mockingbird for the first time ever. Review time, 4 out of 5. Honestly, I didn't like the beginning of the novel, and it made me worried that the rest wouldn't be great, but it definitely got better as it went on, so I'm glad that I read it, and I feel like I learned a lot more about the American South's history. It's not exactly my kind of book, but it's still really good. I read The Day It Rained Forever today, review time, 3 out of 5. It was just too disorganized for me, and a lot of the stories I didn't love, but there were a few good ones, like Here There Be Tigers and Fever Dream. Then I read Tortilla Flat before bed, review time, 3 out of 5. It was interesting and gave me more of a perspective into the lives of people like that, but I didn't absolutely love it. Also, a lot of things reminded me of Canary Row. I read The Picture of Dorian Gray today, and I hadn't read it in more than 5 years, so there was so much that as I was reading I was surprised by since I forgot a lot. Review time, 5 out of 5. This is a perfect book. The main plot is unique. You can see that everything Wilde intended to convey he did so well with the dialogue and everything, and it's especially impressive since it holds up so great even though it's pretty old. The final day in the final book, I finished the whole challenge off with Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury, which I read a year ago and loved, and after rereading it today, I gotta remember why it's one of my favorites. Review time, 5 out of 5, more than a 5 out of 5 really. It's just so beautiful. Like every little drama contributes so much to the story, every character is just so great, and when Douglas was writing the note, that was when I remembered how much I love the book. Honestly, just amazing. So I did it, 50 books, 16,553 pages in 30 days. I'm genuinely so proud of myself for actually pulling it off. Honestly, it was pretty tough, but I'm so glad that I stuck to it. It was an amazing start to the year as well and got me in the mood to read a lot more this year. I really hope that this shows you that you can do anything you put your mind to. I'll see you in the next one.